Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Wells.
We appreciate all the support, whether you're a new viewer or a returning viewer. In our last episode, we talked about the NBA preseason and debuted our segment Hot or Drop, where we kind of discussed, some of the hot takes revolving around the NBA offseason and things of that nature. But before we get started with today's episode, please don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast for updates. Also, check out our TikTok as well. We posted our first video and it did really, really well. So please follow that as well.
And so, I guess we're going to start getting into some more of these preseason games. So obviously the first big one that we have was the matchup between Chet Holmgren and Victor Wembanyama.
Yeah.
Two really intriguing 7-footers. We've talked about both of them a lot before, right? Because they're both, very skilled 7-footers, who can not only, play around the basket, but also can play, and step outside, and they can handle the ball. Um, you know, which is again, which you don't normally see from 7-foot bigs.
Right.
You don't see 7-footers anyways, right? But we have Durant obviously as a forward, but still, this is, we're in some pretty rare territory here, and you know, in the first half, they pretty much went at each other, right? Obviously with Victor, right, he had 20 points, a block, 2 steals, 5 rebounds, 2 of 5 from three, 8 of 13 from the field, right? And then Chet Holmgren, 21 points, 9 rebounds, a block, 7 of 10 from the field, 2 of 2 from three,
Hmm.
5 of 7 from the line. A lot of kind of intriguing plays, right? Both guys, would take the ball and drive into each other, and finish around the basket, flexing, and ones, with
Yeah.
their,
Yeah,
with
with their
their
stick bodies, it's always nice.
exact. Yeah, but it is kind of intriguing because we talked about Victor before, and we kind of thought maybe he would start off, with his defense, kind of being right there, whereas his
Hmm.
offense may, take a little bit of time, to adjust. But offensively, he looked really good. He looked comfortable. There were times where he was kind of trying to see what he could do, against different types of teams. They did start him at the four, with Zach Collins at the five, right? So it seems like that's probably the way that they're gonna use him this year, where he plays alongside another big, that does, a lot more of the physical duty, whereas, he kind of, plays with the ball more and he gets to attack the smaller player,
Right.
which, it'll be interesting to see how other teams guard that because, again, we've seen, he's got a relatively quick, release, in terms of like the setup where he can literally, play off the ball and catch and kind of curl into a shot.
Sure.
Which, again, like that's pretty hard to contest. He did draw, a foul on a jump shot, with that height. And it's just, again, like we saw him in the summer league, we saw him in Vegas, and like it's just incredible to see somebody with that height, and that skill. I like how they also kind of would have, how they've kind of tried to figure out some stuff where it's like, hey, he's 7'4", and if he's around the basket, let's just throw it up, and get it to him,
Right.
as opposed to, kind of just like giving it to him like regularly because they did at different points pass it to him a little bit low, and the commentators, kind of pointed that out as well, where it's like this guy is taller than pretty much every other player. You
Hmm.
need to throw it high so that way he can just get in. Sometimes you can just throw it at the basket and he can catch it and just
Yeah.
tip it in.
He's that
Um,
tall.
yeah, exactly. He's that tall. And then when you go look at Chet, right? Obviously, he's really comfortable, like I said, with the ball in his hands. Kind of shooting off the dribble a little bit as well. Like I said, and that's the other thing that has them stand out from a lot of other bigs is because most bigs usually are either popping from three, or like just kind of catching and shooting. They're not really like like you don't see Brooke Lopez as good of a 3-point shooter as he is for a center. He's not stepping back,
Right.
behind the 3-point line
Off the
and knocking
dribble.
down shots.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, and other bigs like that, right? Like say like a Vucevic or, even like, I guess Towns to an extent, but still, right? Like
I get
you
you.
don't normally see this type of skill, from those type of bigs. Um, so I guess, in terms of the Spurs, again, like we've talked about it before where it's like, record wise, are they going to be that great? Probably not, but they do have a decent amount of talent out there. Um, in terms of a lot of these players, right? Like a Devin Vassell, like a Zach Collins, some other guys who didn't play, like a Keldon Johnson. The main thing I think for him going forward is, if they can find, like a real true starting caliber point guard to pair alongside of him,
Hmm.
that they can play the pick and roll or pick and pop with, I think that's where, it's going to be really scary. And I do feel like for him, we'll get to Chet in a minute. I'll let you talk about him.
Sure.
about Victor first, but like I just feel like it's going to be really difficult to make the case that this guy isn't going to be, anything other than like a superstar unless he just can't stay healthy. Which,
Sure.
again is a fair question considering guys his size don't have a great track record for it. But talk about what you saw about Victor's performance before we get into
Yeah.
Chet.
I will say, as great as it was hilarious. I'm not gonna lie, because there were
Yeah,
some times where I was like, "What? How did he even do that?" Like, I
right.
understand, we've
With the
seen like,
scoop.
yeah, like we've seen guards do that, but to see somebody that big, that tall, and that long pause do that, I was like, "Yo, that's crazy." I was like, it's really cool to see how he kind of showed off every facet of his game. He showed that he can hit the threes off of the dribble. He showed that he has, somewhat of some sort of strength, to be able to body Mr. Holmgren like that. That was pretty wild. I mean, yeah, it was a headbutt, but at the end of the day, Chet still went to the ground, so he has some sort of strength, albeit stick on stick violence. But at the end of the day, he showed that he can get to the rim aggressively and then also, kind of showing us that he does have the touch and the finesse as well. And defensively, I think this play you didn't even mention yet, but there was a play where he kind of got crossed up badly. Kind of left him.
Yeah,
Wemby got left in the dust. But since
right.
he's so lengthy with his arms and his legs, he can recover in 1 to 2 steps, and then he
Oh
just
yeah.
blocks it and pins it off the backboard. I was like, all right, so his defense is strong as well. I would like to see them kind of focus more low posty kind of like vibes. I don't know, more traditional, but if he has all this stuff in his game and in his bag, then why not just let him use it and let it fly?
Yeah, because the other thing is, it's gonna take some time getting used to for some offensive players, because let's say he switched out onto the perimeter, and not that he's gonna necessarily like use his foot speed and stick with these guys, but again, like you mentioned, because of his length, there could be a possession where like, say some guard, has the ball, and it's close to the end of the shot clock and they gotta hoist something up. And like, he can just stick his hand all the way up there and he can get out and just block
Right.
it before, like you said, before you even realize, oh, what the heck? Or at
Yeah.
the very least, like, if anybody who's ever played against, taller players, right? Like sometimes if you have a taller player trying to close out, you have to kind of shoot it a little bit differently, and
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of sometimes that's a little bit difficult to adjust to when you have to do it like,
Sure.
just like
On
that.
the fly, yeah.
Um,
And it'd be
exactly.
interesting to see like a comparison. Like if we take two players with that can finish fairly well around the rim, but they have two different styles. Like it would be kind of interesting to see how he would play against, say, like John Morant or Darius Garland. Because
Right.
Darius Garland would be more of that finesse small guard finisher, but then Ja is like a athletic small guard finisher. So it'd be interesting to see. Is he gonna rise up and you know potentially get on a poster or stop a poster if it's Ja? Because I feel like he's
Right.
gonna be able to pin, layups like Garland's layups or anybody's who's smaller than him. But I'm just curious how he's gonna do against dunks because we've already seen him get dunked on by Kai Jones, and
Yeah.
then like I don't know, we'll see. It should be fun
Yeah.
to watch.
Yeah, like I mean, it was just like you said. I just think some of the craziest play for me was like like you said the defensive plays where it's like it didn't even seem like he had a chance to get there and he got there. And then like I said, the spin and the scoop layup
Yeah,
I
that
think
was
was
wild.
just that was kind of the one where it's like just the fact that like just he was able to kind of just improvise and just kind of get that off is just
It's
kind of just
natural.
again yeah, exactly. The fact that it felt relatively natural to him again being that size and length is just crazy.
Did you see him
Um
cherry pick? That was
yeah,
funny.
I mean
Like I said, it was a
yeah.
funny game because I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. The 7'4" guy doesn't need to be getting rebounds. He could be cherry picking. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah, and that's why they have, the other big, out there with him. Like, again, we saw, like Zach Collins with him. I think, we saw Charles Bassey,
Yeah,
who's height wise, right, pretty undersized, but the
very.
way he plays, he's used as, pretty much a center, right? So I mean, they got some guys to pair with him.
Yeah, for sure.
In terms of the bigs, I just feel like at a certain point, down the line, right? Like it'll be interesting to see how they explore what they do from a point guard position because I
I
feel
agree.
like that's the main thing that you're probably missing right now. But
So
of
you don't
course,
think they
again,
should go forward with Trey Jones? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
well, I mean, for now, that's the option you have. You know what I
sure.
mean? So it's
So you're not too
like
high on him.
not as a starting point guard. I feel
Okay.
like he could be like a pretty solid backup guard, but I'm not sure if he can be like a starting point guard just because he's not like established as a decent outside shooter.
Sure.
He's a little bit spotty, and I feel like again. ideally you'd like your starting point guard to be a little bit better as an outside shooter. But
Right.
I do like his defense and I like his playmaking.
I was just
So
curious.
you never know. Like if his outside shot progresses, it could be. But you just never know because they're probably still going to have a lottery pick again.
Easily.
Because I don't think, yeah, because I don't think they're making the playoffs, and I'm sure they'll be targeting, whoever the best is,
They'll probably get
at whatever
Collier.
position.
That wouldn't
Yeah,
surprise me if they get Isaiah Collier or somebody like that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because there'll be guys, down the road, that they'll be able to look at,
Because
But for
Ron
now,
Holland's more of like a power forward, small forward.
right.
So
So yeah, so for now, you're kind of just looking at what you have and just experimenting, because it's year one of the rebuild. You don't have to get everything right in year one of the
right,
rebuild.
I agree.
And then for Chet, I think if you're Oklahoma City, you got to be pretty, pleased with what you're seeing. Obviously, even though he, was drafted a year ago, right? This is really his rookie year.
hmm
And we've talked about it before. We have some pretty big expectations for him,
Yeah,
in terms of like he's going to be one of the favorites to get rookie of the year. Obviously, I think Wembanyama, I think the odds may have changed a little bit, but for now, I'm pretty sure he's still the favorite.
yeah, he is.
Um, Holmgren, I think, should not be too far behind because again,
Holmgren's third. I think they have
okay,
Scoot second. The last time I
yeah,
checked, it was like so
right.
weird. I was so confused.
And I think with Chet, like the thing is like he may not put up like the same numbers as those guys because he's playing with better talent. But at the same time, because unlike those guys, even though like this is his rookie season, he did have a year where he was able to to train and be able to get his body right. So
Sure.
he'll have that advantage
And he
physically over
doesn't have
those.
as many expectations too. Like
Yeah,
everybody's kind of like their eyes are all really set on Wemby. Like Wemby has to be good or he's a bust. But like Chet,
exactly.
he could just kind of play his game.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that for Oklahoma City, they need Chet, to be really good because the thing is that last year they were 40 and 42 if I'm not mistaken, right? They were in the plan,
hmm
and they again it was a pretty good season for them, in terms of we didn't really expect them to play as well as they did, and they didn't even really have a center, right? Like I
Right.
mean, the guys that they were playing at the center were like really like more like fours, like
Right.
yeah,
Jalen Williams. Yeah.
Jalen Williams. I mean, like Pokashevsky, I guess, but like he was hurt for a lot of last year, so it's
Right.
like, I mean, but now you have a legitimate, 7 footer, even though he's pretty light. You do have a legitimate 7 footer that can, help you on the boards, help you down low in terms of blocks, and he can do things with the ball in his hand. So that should make them a lot more versatile. So I feel like Oklahoma City, we've talked about it before. They are a team that I think, has a chance, to do something this year in terms of like, make the playoffs and, not necessarily advance past the first round, but certainly make it scary. There are some people that I feel like, are in the spot where like, oh, they could win like 50 games. And I feel like that might be just a little bit too much to ask. We
Okay.
have seen young teams like, take a big leap forward from one year to the next. Like if you go way back, right? Like, the previous Thunder group, right, with Durant, Westbrook, Harden, they had like that, big leap from one year to the next.
hmm
Um, like you can look at some other teams, right? Golden State, right? Like a kind of like a similar thing where they went from a non-playoff team, to a team that made it to the second round and lost to the Spurs, right? Like in
Right.
2012, 2013 or whatever, right? So
Right.
like we've seen, that happen before. But again, like it's just, the Western Conference is so deep where it's like, like there's a scenario where yeah, they could be better, but like they may win like maybe 2, 3 more games than they did last year. Because I don't know, like asking, this team to win almost 50 games in the West, that's a lot to ask. I think, especially
It's
considering
contingent
how
on
good.
Chet and Shea though.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. Because like in fairness, the case for them is that they already have a guy, who's one of the best players. In the league. It's not like a guy that's like a, like a top 40 guy. You know what I mean? Like it's not a guy that's like the 40th best, right? Like most
Right.
people would have him somewhere in that top, 20, 15, whatever you want to.
Yeah, I would say top 15, top 10.
Yeah, exactly. 15. Some people say top 10, but like regardless, they have a guy that for the most part you can go to,
Right.
late in games and like run a lot of your offense through.
hmm
Like obviously we'll have to see like, once he gets to like a playoff environment, what does he look like, right? Because he wasn't great in the play in last year. But either way, um, regardless, he's obviously at an age where he can still get better. And then like I said for
Same with
Chet,
Giddy
right?
too.
Yeah, giddy, right? Exactly. And that's the other thing where like now, that you have another ball handler, well, semi ball handler with Chet, right? Then like what does Giddy do? Like
Right.
obviously he can play with the ball in his hands, but he'll have some advantages because like if somebody's focused on guarding Shea and somebody else is focused on guarding Chet, or Jalen Williams, right, then like, that obviously leaves him to be able to do some stuff, right? And
Right.
again, he's a big guard, kind of like Shea as well, so he'll be able to do some things like in terms of bullying smaller guards, maybe being able to post up or stuff like that. So I'm really intrigued to see like this group together. Especially because again, like they were already a solid team last year without Chet, and then if you add Chet and he's really good right out of the gates, then that could make them like a really dangerous team.
Yeah.
You know, some people think that like they should make a move. Like right now, I don't feel like they should do that yet, just because the team is still really young.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, obviously, they got a bright future,
I think they
ahead
need to
of them.
wait till other picks come in and pan out. That's just me though.
Yeah, yeah, because that's the thing. Like they'll have a lot of time, to decide what they want to do because they have a ton of picks, and like they'll be that team, one of those teams where it's like, okay, player X is available. We have a ton of picks. We have some young players that aren't necessarily playing a whole lot that might be decent. Take those guys, and you can give us that guy.
Right.
So, but for now, I think, again, see how these young guys do, see what they're capable of, and then you just go from there. But, like it's nice to see like, now we got, some big man, battles, now in terms of like, because there was a stretch where like, some people were wondering whether or not like the center position was kind of going away, but now it's definitely back and it's here in a big way. And it's very different, from what it was before. Because now you're seeing a lot of these bigs, with a lot of skill,
Hmm.
where they're not necessarily just kind of like, flopped around the basket, kind
Right.
of like just either, bullying or posting up. Not that that isn't good, but like, now there's like another layer where you got guys that can step all the way out to the perimeter and they can handle the
Right.
ball.
It's not
And
stale. I get it.
yeah, like it's a lot more versatile and
Hmm.
there's a lot more going on. It's just really intriguing to see, these massive players being able to do that.
Yeah.
And hopefully we get this, big time, rivalry between these two bigs for like the next, decade or
Yeah.
whatever.
And it would also be kind of cool is to see them reignite, not just the big rivalry, but the team rivalry too, because I think the Spurs were kind of the team that Durant had some trouble getting past, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I mean, yeah, I mean, especially, once Oklahoma City had arrived as like an actual contender, like, 2012, they beat the Spurs,
Mm-hmm.
get to the finals. 2013, I think they didn't get to the Spurs because they lost in an earlier round,
Right.
but I remember in 2014 they lost to the Spurs in the conference finals, right?
Yeah.
That was I think Ibaka, missed a little bit of time early in the series and they lost in 6. And then
Yeah.
2016 they beat the Spurs in the second round. That was when they lost to Golden
Golden
State.
State, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
So
they've
these
definitely
teams
had
have some history. So it would be kind of cool to see that rivalry reignited in, Chet and Wemby. And I know, Wemby had his press conference, and they were like, "Do you guys have a relationship?" And then he was like, "No." So that should already tell you enough. It's all business with these guys, and it should be really fun to see them duke it out because I think, they do have very similar play styles. Obviously similar builds in terms of, weight, height, length. So I'm looking forward to it, and it should be, really fun to watch.
right. Yeah, exactly. So, moving on to another game, New Orleans, Orlando. So 122, 105, Orlando. I mean, most of the main guys played in the first half, but obviously, the key things here is, looking at New Orleans, seeing what Zion looks like right after, there's had been a lot of buzz, about him being, in really good shape. I think David Griffin, right, for the Pelicans, he mentioned like, yeah, this is the first off season where he's really taken his conditioning seriously.
Right.
Um,
They're not babying him anymore.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think they mentioned like, yeah, he talked to guys like Ingram and McCollum, in terms of their processes for
Hmm.
what they do in the off season, and he looked fine. Obviously, it's preseason. But again, like just seeing him out there and being able to play, right? Doing a lot of different things, right? Being able to score obviously around the basket, being able to rebound, being able to run some offense through him as a passer because I think he's a really good passer.
Hmm.
Um, just seeing him again because we hadn't seen him in so long. He hadn't
Yeah.
played
It had been a
since
while.
since I think what was it, late December, early January. And
Yeah.
at that point he initially looked like he might be an MVP candidate. But seeing that this group, um, I'm intrigued by New Orleans because again, like they're a team where when they were healthy, they were a good team. The issue for them is it's so hard to trust them in terms of their health. Um, and then looking forward, right? Like the 3-point shooting. it wasn't great last game. They were 8 for 34. But again, like, you still factor in like some of that was the garbage time guys. What do they do in terms of rim protection? So, there's still some questions about this team. And then, like going over to Orlando, right? That's the young team that we're all high on,
Yes.
right? In terms of like, seeing guys like Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, right? Wendell Carter Jr., Markel Fultz. Jalen Suggs was with that starting group, right? Offensively didn't play very well, but again, still was active on the board, still, played good defense.
Yeah.
That's the main, link for him is again like the shooting because he can do a lot of other things relatively well. Um, they trotted out some other guys like Gary Harris, Jonathan Isaac,
Right.
um, Mo Wagner, as well. So Anthony Black and Jet Howard played a little bit as well. Not much from them. Again with Black, like he's more like a defensive minded guard, right? You don't really
Hmm.
expect a whole lot more from him. And then Jet Howard, like you mentioned, he's basically a 3-point shooter, 2 of 5 from three, so you'll take that.
Yeah, not
Uh,
horrible.
right. So that's the thing is Orlando does have a lot of options in terms of the different guys they can put out there. Because again, a lot of length. The main thing, again, similar to New Orleans, is that 3-point shooting. What does that look like? Wendell Carter Jr., he was 4 of 5 from three. They've kind of tried to put him in the corners as a 3-point shooter, which
Hmm.
I think is, since he's a good mid-range shooter, I think that makes a lot of sense. And if he can help, with that 3-point shooting, that's nice as well. And that
Yeah.
kind of gives room, to the other interior guys like Apollo, or a Fultz to be able to operate, because those guys don't necessarily like taking as many, threes. So, I mean, like I said, there's a lot to like here as well. So kind of, I guess, if you want to get into your thoughts about New Orleans and Orlando, because,
Yeah.
again, we're pretty high on Orlando, in the sense of like, we like a lot of their guys. I'm not talking about them as a contender, just in terms of I think they're going to be a lot better than last year. And then New Orleans, they're going to go as far as Zion takes them in terms of his health. So, tell me what you
Sure.
thought.
So, in terms of New Orleans, like you said, it was really nice to see Zion. I think he looked good. He looked healthy. He looked in shape. And he looked energetic and he looked happy. So you can only ask for that. And then Brandon Ingram, I thought he played decent. 50% from the field, just like Zion, on a lot more shots. But I'm not too mad about, how this team really played. Uh, and, these guys didn't really play too much. So this isn't, keep in mind, it's preseason now. This isn't, the real NBA games yet. But there is one thing that kind of stood out to me, and this kind of caught me off guard. It's Jordan Hawkins. Didn't look too
Yeah.
good. 4 for 14, kind of was just jacking up shots, 1 for 6 from three. That's not really what I was expecting from him. But, people have off nights, so I'm sure that'll, get better the longer he's in the league. But, that was kind of a stinker, and I'm sure that,
Minus
yeah, minus minus 30 plus minus. It's pretty bad. But overall, I think the main thing to take away from this game is that Zion played and he looked healthy and he looked good. And in the limited minutes that he played, which was 15, he did, have a positive plus minus and didn't really do anything that was like crazy or head scratching. And, there was nothing that would raise concern, I think, about Zion from this game.
Yeah. Like for me, I already know that he's really good.
Right,
I just got to see him be able to hold up for, 60 games. Like,
right.
because if he can do that, then New Orleans will, should be a playoff team.
Yeah,
Um,
because he's one of a
but
kind.
again, yeah, exactly. And he did, I think it seemed like he definitely looked like he was in, better shape. Obviously, he's still big,
Right,
but like,
versus who he
that's
is.
still a far cry from what he looked like, like a year or so ago
Yeah,
when
it was
he was
bad.
like, I think it was like over 300, if I'm not mistaken.
It was bad.
Um,
You could clearly see he
yeah,
didn't give a crap. But now I think he realizes his career is at stake. New Orleans' future is at stake. So I don't think he wants to leave New Orleans either. I think that's something people aren't
yeah.
talking about either.
Yeah, and he signed his extension.
Yeah,
There was buzz about maybe trading him, but
yeah, that
we
was a
never bought
crazy
into it.
time. That was a crazy
Yeah,
time.
yeah, it was. We never necessarily bought into the idea that he was going to get traded, but the rumors were going around, during the off season, so you
Right,
can't necessarily discount it. But the main thing for New Orleans obviously is just some bad luck in terms of a couple of injuries, right? Like
right.
Trey Murphy's going to be out for a while, and he
Hmm.
was like he was a big part of their team, and one of their best 3-point shooters. So obviously that hurts. Alvarado, right? That hurts because he's a point of attack defender. He's a decent shooter.
Hmm.
And then Nance, right? I
Yeah,
think he's gonna be out for a couple weeks as well. Like I think Nance and Alvarado will be back relatively soon,
Yeah,
but Trey Murphy is the main one that really hurts because he's gonna be out, for at least I think like the first chunk of the season.
that's why I'm
With
thinking
that,
Jordan Hawkins has got to step up.
right? So yeah, one of those other forwards on the roster, kind of like you mentioned, somebody is gonna have to make up for the minutes, that you're not
Right.
getting with Murphy, right? Whether or not that's like a Najee Marshall or somebody like that, or like a Hawkins or somebody as you mentioned,
Hmm.
Dyson Daniels, right? Maybe
True.
he kind of gets more
Forgot
minutes,
about him.
but yeah, but one of those guys is gonna have to step in because I think that's a pretty big loss for them because he's a really good player. And I think he really fits into a lot of the things that they like to do because he's athletic, he can shoot well, he defends well,
Yeah.
he's got some size. So he's kind of like a perfect fit there, and to not have him, I think, is a relatively significant loss.
Right. And then looking at Orlando, I think this is pretty much as good as you can really get, with this squad. This is kind of what we wanted to see, a well balanced attack, pretty much from everybody in the starting five, except for, I guess, Jalen Suggs. But like you said, he was more of a hustle guy this game. My question would be, what are they going to do with Jonathan Isaac? So like, I mean, it's clear that Franz is better, right? It's clear
Yeah,
Paolo's better. So he's gonna probably just come off the bench, I'm guessing. Like for the entire season. That'll be interesting, unless there's some injuries. But that's kind of
yeah,
interesting because this guy was picked fairly high, um, and his defensive prowess is something that people really like to talk about. But offensively, I feel like he's kind of always struggled somewhat. I think he's always been raw offensively, but defensively, I think he's a stud and he always has been. I'm just curious what his role long term is going to be on this team. But
yeah,
outside of that, I liked what I saw from the starters. Even they played more, I think, than the New Orleans starters, even though it's still limited. But I really like what I saw from Fultz, Wendell Carter Jr., like you said, Paolo, of course, Franz. So, overall, I think this team is going to, fit right into where we think they're going to be
yeah.
expectations wise.
Again, a 6'10" guy who can handle the ball, and Paolo, he can
Yeah,
cross you over in one play and then drive down the lane and dunk on you on the next play. Like
right.
that's a really unique type of player
And
to have.
still
Again,
flies under the radar.
yeah, another player with size and skill. Because again, even though he's 6'10", he's a big dude. I mean, he's listed, I think, is like 6'10", 250-ish. He's a big guy.
Yeah.
Like obviously Zion is huge, in terms of his size, but he's only 6'6", right? Paolo is 6'10".
When we saw
Um,
him, I was like, is that Paolo? Like when we saw
yeah,
him at the Summer League and you were like, yeah, I was like, uh, I didn't know he was that big. Like he really looks like a center, really.
exactly. Yeah, he's basically kind of in a way center sized, and
Yeah.
he's essentially their four, handling the ball. I mean, they got a big team. Like I said, that's one of the things I think that's intriguing about them is just again, can they add on to that skill, and get some 3-point shooting out there? Because I think that's kind of the missing piece for this team.
Right.
That if they get there, right, that's where they're going to be really, really good. Because like I said, I think they'll be better this year for sure. I just like I don't expect them to be like a playoff team, but I do expect them to be a very competitive team that has a chance to make the play in.
Okay.
Especially if things click with most of their young guys. And like you
Yeah.
said, the Isaac thing will be interesting to watch, just because again he was at one point he was a starter, and now he's kind of relegated to a role guy coming off the bench. And that's the main thing, right? Like with his offense not being like where you would like it to be,
Hmm.
that's the main thing that's going to prevent him probably from being like a consistent starter.
Right.
Um, because now, like, he's at a point where, like, they have other guys, and those guys, have already, like you said, overtaken him on that depth chart,
Yes.
right? Like, Paolo obviously is the number one pick, came in already better.
Yeah. He was nice.
Franz Wagner has now gotten to the point where, like, he's the better player, like you mentioned. And so, those are your forwards, right? So, he's not going to be better than those guys. But, if he can just be healthy, for a stretch, which is,
Right.
again, he hasn't been, then that can continue to add on to the team because then that's another long, versatile defender that you can put out there.
It's scary.
Um, and again, if you can bring some guys off the bench like a Jet Howard or a Gary Harris, or a Cole Anthony, then that kind of helps to offset some of the shooting that you may not necessarily get with him.
Hmm.
Um, because yeah, so we'll see how that continues to go.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, they're not going to keep all these guys. Like it's because we mentioned one of the guards is probably going to have to go. At some point because they have so many of them.
Yeah.
Because again they got Fultz, Suggs, Gary Harris, Cole Anthony. I mean, like that's a number of guards, and like you're going to have to pay some of those guys soon. They've already paid Fultz. I think Gary Harris, I guess, is like maybe one more year, but like, you'd have to pay Anthony, you'd have to pay Suggs down the line. And they're not and Black. They just drafted Anthony Black. So that's
Hmm.
another guard, to add. And you might consider Jet Howard a guard. So, or at least
Yeah,
a guard forward.
two
So,
guard. Yeah,
exactly. So at a certain point, I do wonder who they decide, to keep and who they decide to move. But again, that's not something that they're gonna have to do right now.
right. They
Maybe
got
down
time.
the line, but to start the season, they have who they have.
Right.
Yeah. More games, obviously, with the Bucks, Grizzlies, we still don't have those guys playing yet, right? Reportedly Lillard and Giannis will play, I believe Sunday against the Lakers. So,
Okay.
hopefully everybody plays because that will be kind of intriguing to see, those guys play because we just haven't seen it yet.
Right.
Um,
Potential finals matchup could be. We
yeah,
never know.
yeah, yeah. You never know. Um, Moving on to some other games, Cavs Hawks, right? So this one was, kind of a funny, game, in terms of how it ended. So,
Okay.
we hadn't mentioned it yet, I don't think, but Jared Allen, he's going to be out for at least a couple of weeks because I believe he has a bone bruise.
Okay.
I think in his ankle, if I'm not
Ah,
mistaken, it's either his
it's
ankle or his
rough.
knee. Um, so obviously that makes some things tough because that means now Mobley's going to have to be pushed to the center spot,
Oh
as
boy.
opposed to being the four.
Hmm.
But it does give us a chance to look at like, hey, what would this type of lineup look like? And they started Garland and Mitchell with their normal backcourt. They had both Levert and Max Strus in, so a very small group out
I don't like
there. Yeah,
that.
but
I'm sorry.
yeah, I mean, like Garland didn't play very well. He was 1 for 10.
Yeah.
Strus, he was 1 for 4 from three, which again, he's mainly out there to shoot threes.
Right.
I think that addition is fine because again, they needed some outside shooting, and again, like it's a little bit bare bones because you're missing a starter.
Sure.
Um, you know, and then but outside of that, then I also wanted to look at Atlanta because again, since they moved John Collins, what was their lineup going to look like? And they had Sadiq Bey and Jalen Johnson in there.
Hmm.
I think DeAndre Hunter was out, so I'm assuming when he comes back, he's going to start, and then that leaves probably I'm going to assume maybe Sadiq Bey. Um, but again, I do kind of wonder because it's a different look. And those guys are going to have to kind of prove like they can be consistent, rotational guys. I know DeAndre Hunter was already paid, but like, I don't know that contract. What was it? It was like 4 years, 80 or ninety
Yeah,
million
it was
dollars.
nasty.
He's fine. I think he's okay, but like, again, is he like your long term starter?
I would
Like,
have
I just
put
feel like,
Adrian Griffin in there, but might just be me.
yeah, yeah, AJ
Or
Griffin. He
AJ,
came off.
excuse me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, I think there is a world because we talked about it. There's definitely a world where the Hawks are a better regular season team, especially if Trey Young and Dejounte Murray kind of figure it out together. Because Young from a shooting standpoint didn't shoot that well last season, but we know he's very good and he's still
Yeah.
young. And again, like with Quinn Snyder right now, you have him in there, and that's an upgrade from the coaching position. So what does he instill in there in terms of his system? Murray and Young, they were 2 of 8 and 2 for 7 together, so that's not great. But again, it's one game, it's
Yeah.
preseason. Um, but the funniest part was, like once it was garbage time in the fourth and it was back and forth, and then Amani Bates, he comes in and he hit like, a go ahead three, and then
Yeah.
he fouled the guy right at the end. Um, and the guy won the game.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Hey, shout out Amani Bates though. He had a
yeah,
decent game. I think we do have to shout him out a little bit. He had
it was. I'm trying to remember who it was that hit the game winner. I think it was if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Trent Forrest. Yeah, that's who it
oh
was. He got
jeez.
the in one. And again, it's again Bates. He won't really play for Cleveland. He's on a two-way. So
Right.
he won't be playing all this year. But it's kind of funny because those things is kind of encapsulate what he is as a player, right? Because it's like on the one hand, he's a solid shooter. For the forward spot, and then on the other hand, sometimes he'll make mistakes defensively because we talked about it when we saw him in the summer league.
Yes.
There's a world where like he can turn into a relatively productive player. It's
Right.
just a matter of can he get better on the defensive end because we know
Right.
he can shoot. But again, back to the other regular squads.
Hmm.
I know you mentioned you didn't like that Cleveland lineup, but that's going to be interesting to see what Cleveland does in terms of who is that um other guy, the two guys that will play alongside of him.
Hmm.
Coro came off the bench. He actually played very well off the bench. He had 19 points, 2 of 4 from three. So if his 3-point shot gets better, that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Just because he's not like a willing 3-point shooter. But without Jared Allen, your only other options at center, outside of Mobley is basically Damian Jones, who wasn't, he was okay, I guess, but I feel like he hasn't played as well as people thought, in
Hmm.
terms of like I think people were warming up to him in Sacramento, but
Hmm.
he just hasn't been quite as productive as you would like, which has kind of been the story for him for most of his career. And then the other option is Tristan Thompson, right?
Right.
Who, isn't as old as you would think, but he's still obviously not the same player, that he used to be. And you probably ideally don't really want him as like your primary backup center.
Yeah.
So, in terms of that group, while Allen is out, who would you start, alongside, Garland, Mitchell, and Mobley? And
Okay.
I'm assuming Strus because of his
Yeah.
contract would probably start.
Yeah.
So I guess it's, who's the fifth starter along those, with
Sure.
those guys.
So
Think.
I'd have to take out Levert. Obviously, I think that's the guy who's got to go. Just because he's a scorer, and I think he can score off the bench just as well as he would, while starting. I don't know if they were just trying to figure that out, but I would probably go with like somebody like Isaac Okoro. They drafted him for a reason, um, or Isaiah Mobley. I think that's kind of like a polarizing take, but from what I've seen from him, he seems like a little interesting archetype of a player. He's like he seems like undersized, but it seems like he knows how to get to the basket. He can shoot, and he knows how to draw fouls. So, um, definitely wouldn't be opposed to that. But I know there's a lack of experience there, so I'd probably just go with Isaac Okoro.
I think the main thing is tough is then that means Max Strus is essentially like a four, in a way, and that makes it
Really,
a
I
little.
would have thought Okoro would have been like the four, but I don't know.
Yeah, the issue is he's like what 6'5".
Yeah,
Yeah, so I mean,
but
then
Levert,
that's
I
like.
mean, the guy doesn't play defense.
Yeah, that's the main, and again, this is kind of the issue that we talked about last year, with Cleveland, is the lack of options at the wing, and I mean you do have Struess, but with Allen out, that definitely kind of hurts, what your plans would be, right? Because if you have Arlen and Mitchell and Struess, that's a pretty good, three groups of guys that can hit jumpers, right? And then
Sure.
that kind of offsets, the lack of jump shooting you get from Allen and Mobley, but now with Allen out, now you got to kind of scramble, to do some other things. And, I guess, like, do you think Mobley's kind of ready to take the leap into, okay, you're probably going to be our starting center for the first, you know, month potentially of the season? Because, again, I think they said Allen is out at least 2 weeks. So if he's
Yeah.
out at least 2 weeks, that pretty much means, like, okay, he'll probably miss at least a few games to start the season.
Yeah, that's tough because I'm not gonna lie. No disrespect here, but he was getting dogged in the playoffs. Like it was bad. It was actually hard to watch. But I'm sure he took that personally, and got better in the offseason because I mean, we're both Evan Mobley fans. We want to see him succeed, and I think he does have a lot of potential being their starting five or their starting center. But I guess it's tough because now that the big man position has gotten so versatile and gotten so physical, I'm curious to see, how well does his game translate? Because I think we need to see him be able to shoot a little bit better. I think the inside stuff is fine, the defense is fine, but I think the shooting is something that people are still not giving him the respect for, and I think that's pretty accurate because he's kind of been a piss poor shooter so far in his career.
Yeah,
So I think they do need to put a shooting big or some other shooter around him, and I guess that's probably what the philosophy was for this. They're like maybe he can't really shoot right now, so they're just going like Darius Garland, Karis LeVert, Donovan Mitchell, and Strus because they can all shoot threes at a decent rate. But if
yeah.
the three's not falling from those guys, and then it's just Mobley out there. I mean, at that point, nobody's really hitting any threes, and I don't know. To me, that's kind of weird. But I think he has what it takes. It all comes
Yeah,
down to did he really put in the work in the offseason?
right. Yeah. So would you start like a Niang or like or a Dean Wade, or would you kind of just leave it as it is and just
Mhm.
kind of just hope for the best until Allen comes back?
Like Dean Wade, I don't think is a starter caliber kind of player. I just don't foresee that. Um, I could see Niang starting, a little bit because I have seen him play and start for Philly, but I hate that guy. Just saying, but I don't know. I really am just stuck on Isaac Okoro. I think
Yeah.
Okoro should be starting. I would just start Okoro over Levert. And now we are in like an age where it's positionless basketball, but at the same time, going small does not really work anymore. I don't think. I think everybody knows that you need to be a little bit bigger and more versatile and skilled.
Or at the
Um,
very least, if you
yeah,
do go small, you got to have like the right people in the right,
right. And
roles.
this ain't it.
Yeah, like Max Strus, I don't really think you want as a four. Like if you go small with him as a three, okay, but like as a four, like I don't know about that because he's not like a great rebounder, or something like that. He's kind of, again, offensively, he's mainly a shooter.
They don't have a
And
lot
then
of options though. Dean
yeah,
Wade
exactly.
ain't it,
Yeah, so
really.
that's Yeah, so that's the main thing. They might just kind of have to kind of just roll with it, and just kind of mess around until Allen comes back. Because hopefully he won't be gone for too long. Because again, they did
Sure.
say at least a couple weeks, but you never know. Maybe he can kind of come back, right at the end of the 2 weeks, like closer to three, and like he's only missed like a few games,
Right.
So hopefully,
I get it.
I think the main thing is at least for the regular season they'll need him back. The main question is will that work in the playoffs? But
Right.
as for Atlanta. What in terms of like
Okay.
the fifth guy for them, what do you think? Because
Yeah,
like I said, I'm
this is a tough
assuming
one.
it's going to be Trey Young, Dejounte Murray, Capella, and then DeAndre Hunter. So who's the fifth guy to you for that squad? Is it Sadiq Bey? Is it Jalen Johnson? Is it somebody else?
Right.
Like how do you feel about that?
I mean, like right now, my gut is telling me Sadiq Bey. Um, but then Okongwu. Well, why isn't he out there? I know like people do they consider him a center or a power forward? I've always thought of him more as a four. So I don't know.
He's
I don't know if how well he would fit next to Capella. That would be my only issue.
I think he's kind of on this team looked at as sort of like their other center.
Okay,
So
then
like
never mind. Then I would probably say like Sadiq Bey, but I just don't know if he's ready to step up into that role per se.
right because Detroit, but Detroit was kind of
They
like
were horrible.
Yeah, whereas like, now you're on Atlanta, you're expected, to contribute to like at
Right.
least a team, and can he actually do that? Because in
Right.
fairness, we've seen guys, play well, in like basically like, lose situations, like in the sense of like you're on a team that's not very good, you
Mhm.
just get to play, you get to put up numbers, and then they'll come over to another team, that has bigger expectations and maybe not necessarily do a whole lot. We'll have to see because it's not, I don't, it's not that he can't play because I think he's fine.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of can he contribute, in a winning situation? Can he be a true impact player? And he's
Right.
got an opportunity to do that now, with John Collins out, of
I
the
agree.
mix for Atlanta. So, we'll see if he can step up. What did you think of Kobe Buffkin in his debut?
Um, it was interesting. Very streaky. I don't really know how to. I can't really pin what went wrong because I feel like he wasn't taking horrible shots. He did shoot 4 for 11, 1 for 6 from three, and this is a guy who I think had a lot of clout and a lot of hype coming into the league. Not as much as some of his peers, but I think he was kind of one of those players where they're like, okay, this is a good pickup. But I mean, if he's gonna be playing like that, and then Trey Young and Dejounte Murray gonna be playing like that doesn't really give me a lot of hope for this squad. But I think he'll be fine down the line. It is just one game. It is just preseason, and he's a rookie.
Right.
So I mean, there's only but so much that we could expect. But I still never really understood the fit for Kobe Buffkin here in Atlanta. But somewhere else, I think he would be great. But I don't know. That might just be me.
Yeah, exactly. So, moving on to another matchup, Hornets Heat. The Heat won 113-109. Obviously, we've kind of dogged the Heat at times, just in this offseason, just because of, what happened with the Lillard thing.
Yeah.
Um, but again, in their first preseason game, obviously, Jimmy Butler didn't play. Tyler Hero, obviously who had been in a bunch of trade rumors, had 22 points. It was on 22 shots, but still 22 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. Bam, 13 and 6. Um, Josh Richardson starting 7 points, 3 assists, 4 boards, right? Duncan Robinson came off the bench, 0 for 7. But, like you said, it's one game. Thomas Bryant, 15 points, 8 rebounds. Jaime Jaquez Jr., right, kind of made his debut, 13.7 rebounds, 2 assists, looked really comfortable, looked like he was ready to
Yes, sir.
contribute right away. And that's something that you'd like to see if you're Miami, because again, the world where Miami is still like a very competitive, team
Hmm.
is a world where like, even though you lost like a Gabe Vincent and Max Strus, some of these other guys, kind of just come in and step up. Like a Jaquez, who is a rookie, but
Right.
still, if he can come in and give you some production. Jovic, did he only played 7 minutes, but if he can kind of step up in his second year, maybe like an Orlando Robinson, who had a pretty solid game. As like a guy who can kind of play both ends of the floor as a big. Um, Even like a random guy like a Cole Swider, right? Like a former Laker
Yeah. He
two-way
went
guy, right?
off.
He had 17 off the bench, 5 of 9 from three. So that's the thing. The Heat, are kind of able to find these guys, who can kind of step in and contribute. Obviously it's one game, but like, do you feel a little bit differently about the Heat, in terms of like,
Huh.
obviously like, now that the sting, of the Lillard trade is over, like, do you still feel like, hey, they may have a shot just because they've been in it the last few years, or are you still kind of, out on them in terms of their ability to, make some noise in the East this year?
Yeah, shot to make the finals, no shot. Shot to make the playoffs, I think they have a high chance just because they have Jimmy Butler. And at the end of the day, the core of guys I think is really strong, in Bam, Jimmy, and Tyler Hero. I think that's a good, three group of guys that you should keep together for the long run. It's just a matter of how well are these other people going to play because if if Jaquez is playing like this, I know he's a rookie, but if Jaquez continues this play, I think that's a great pickup. That'll definitely boost, how I feel about their offseason. I'm not very high on Kyle Lowry, because he's at the tail end of his career. So I don't know. It's hard to gauge this squad because I feel like they do turn up the intensity when it does, come to play in playoff time. I think that's something that we all know and love about this squad, but I also hate it because it's so hard to judge and figure out what on earth is going on with this squad because
Right.
we'll never really know what they're gonna do until they get there. You know what I mean? Because
Right.
they've had years
Yeah.
where they've stunk, the same core of guys, and they've
Yeah.
kind of pooped the bed first round. But then there's other times like last year, Cinderella Magic. They were what, the eighth seed and
Yeah.
went all the way to the NBA Finals. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like
The
I
two
don't
times.
know. It's hard to gauge.
Yeah, the two times they went to the finals, they were a lower seed. They were the fifth seed in 2020, and they were the eighth seed last season. So, I mean, like they're, like I guess I'm kind of at a point where, like I said, now that I've kind of like sized it up, I feel like yeah, you probably still shouldn't like give up and sleep on the Heat. But at the same time, I just feel like it's just going to be a really tall task just because the
I
other
agree.
teams around them got better. But, I do think in fairness, with the Vincent and Strus stuff, like they weren't great for them in the regular season. It was more so that they turned up come playoff time.
And
The
that's what got them
question is,
paid.
yeah, so the question is, who are the guys on this roster, that are going to have that moment come playoff time, right? Like, where these guys, who again are maybe okay in the regular season, but come playoff time, they play really well. Like, the question is, who do you foresee? Because, like I said, it's probably going to have to be one of those guys, at least one of those guys we mentioned, like a Jaquez or, a Jovic
Mhm.
or, a Highsmith or Robinson or somebody like that.
It's gonna be Jaquez for me. I think, I think he would be the youngest out of all of them. Actually, that might be incorrect because I think Jaquez played all 4 years at UCLA. So I'm not sure. Don't quote me on the age, but he is a rookie. I think he's probably got the freshest legs out of everybody, and I think he plays with the most hustle. And I think I like that a lot. And his game is so well rounded, and he's doing pretty much what he did at UCLA. Scoring and then grabbing rebounds and then playing some sort of defense and hustling. So can't be too mad at the pickup. I think we were all really happy about him going to Miami. He really fits their culture. Um, so I think it would probably be him who turns up the intensity, but it's kind of hard to gauge because he is a rookie. Um, so I might just go out on a limb and say somebody like Jovic, maybe. I don't know, because I think he was, around and, got to see the run last year. So maybe that ignites a fire under him. It's kind of hard for me. I don't think, I don't know how to say his name, Swider.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I don't think he's gonna be the guy. I mean, it is kind of cool to see him, catch fire from three, but I don't think he's gonna be the guy come playoff time to turn up the intensity. And I doubt it's gonna be Duncan Robinson. This guy has kind of fallen off the map for me. But who knows? We'll see. He may just turn up like he did in the bubble, but who knows?
and then, on the Hornet side, they went with a different lineup where they had Gordon Hayward starting in place of Brandon Miller.
Hmm.
And again, it's kind of intriguing to see just in terms of because again we've talked about Charlotte and we think they could be better, than what people think just because they do have some talent on there. It's just a matter of how does it come together. Brandon Miller in his first game, 8 points, 3 assists, a steal, 3 for 9, 3 turnovers. But again, he is a rookie.
Right.
And it's one preseason game. The question for him is again like how does the scoring translate? Can he do some other stuff other than just score? Because like I said, I still think he'll be solid. It's just a matter of again like I said, what is his role? Because again assuming at some point whenever Bridges comes back from his suspension, does does he become the starter? Does Hayward kind of slide into that sixth man role? Or does Hayward still start? Because Hayward is on a big deal. It's in the last year of it, but for now, it may be okay to just kind of ease Miller into it as opposed to kind of like throwing him to the wolves
Yeah.
right away. But what do you think of this decision? Do you feel like it should be Hayward or Miller starting?
I think it should be Hayward. You never want to rush the process. I think this team is in probably the most unique spot out of all of the top three draft picks because I feel like with Wemby, the Spurs desperately needed this guy. They desperately needed Wemby. Same thing with Portland because we were going into this season with the assumption they were moving on from Damian Lillard, so they needed a new franchise PG. Okay, cool. But then with this squad, they're kind of almost set at every position starting wise if you think about it. Lonzo Ball or Lonzo LaMelo Ball I think is a great PG. I think everybody knows that. The only question is his health. Okay, cool. Rozier I think is a decent, two guard, combo guard. He's been here for a while and he's been in the league for a while. I think this is what his seventh year or something like that. So,
Right.
he's been around and I think, he's decent for the amount of shots that he puts up. And then, there's Gordon Hayward, who I think has been underwhelming, post injury.
Yeah.
And,
And he hasn't been on the floor a lot.
exactly. So he's been underwhelming and also hurt a lot still. So, it's kind of interesting because at this point, I think Gordon Hayward is better than Brandon Miller. I think everybody can say that right now. At
Yeah.
this point in their
Yeah.
careers,
I think
a guy,
healthy. I think he's a solid player.
yeah, at this point in their careers, Gordon Hayward is better than Brandon Miller. So I don't have too much to say about that. But, with Brandon Miller, it's not a bad idea to bring him off the bench because they don't desperately need Brandon Miller, if that kind of makes sense. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't
Yeah,
think
in
Brandon
fairness.
Miller is going to be the franchise changing player. I think he's going to probably be the player that has a lot of potential, but not nearly as much potential as, Wemby or Scoot.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, they brought Lamelo off the bench, when he was first a rookie,
Right,
and in a way that kind of did good for him, just to kind of establish like a culture, a level of discipline and accountability.
right.
So we'll see. Because again, with Charlotte, they were, very much a mess last year. A lot of things, that could go wrong went wrong for them. So
Hmm.
hopefully they can kind of reestablish something, to get back on track. Because it wasn't that long ago when this team, looked like they were on the up and up as a, as a decent team. They
Sure.
were in the play-in for back-to-back years, got destroyed in the play-ins, but still, like,
We thought they were on
they
the
were
come
like,
up.
yeah, it felt like they were an entertaining team with a lot to look forward to. It just hasn't been that, the
Yeah.
last, it just hadn't been that last year. It was pretty disappointing, on all fronts. So hopefully they can kind of get back to something, from that perspective. Other guys who played, Nick Smith Jr., played 20 minutes, 11 points, 4 of 10 from
Hmm.
the field. Other guys, Nick Richards, JT Thor, Amari Bailey played 4 minutes, but I think he's a two-way guy if I'm not mistaken, or
Yes,
at
he
least
is. He probably won't
yeah,
be playing on the real
right.
roster.
So
Doubt it.
yeah, so not a whole lot, of takeaways from there. And then moving on to Indiana, Houston, right? The battle of two really young teams. No Halliburton, obviously. But other guys played like Jarius Walker. Again, his thing is, raw as a, offensive player, right? Not a great outside shooter, which again, like, they brought in Obi Toppin. It seems like Toppin is going to be the starting four. That's fine. Have
Hmm.
them, kind of compete, for
Hmm.
minutes out there. Jalen Smith, he was fine, in this spot. I think he's in what his third, fourth season at this point.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think
I
so.
guess
Yeah,
fourth now, right? Because he
I
was
think
in
it'll
the
be
draft with
fourth. Yeah.
Halliburton.
Hmm.
Yeah, so he was in the draft with Halliburton. So we'll see if they can get stuff out of him. Matherin, Bruce Brown. right? Other guys, Ben Shepherd, right? He looked pretty solid, as a shooter, right? And that's kind of, what he was brought in here to do.
Yep.
Buddy Hield's still here. Didn't really do a whole lot scoring wise, but
Hmm.
still he can shoot. And he showed some playmaking. Um, but again, with Indiana, there's just a lot of flexibility here in terms of they have size at more positions now. They have a lot more shooting. So this is a team that I think should be a really competitive team. Like you
Absolutely.
know maybe they don't make the playoffs, but again, it's another team similar to Orlando where they should be competitive. Every night, and if things go right, they have a chance to get in there. To
Yeah.
squeeze in there as one of those final two spots. Like I said, if things go their way.
Right.
Um, and then, moving on to Houston, right? Obviously, they had their players play as well, right? Most of their guys, right? They were the team that ended up winning 122 to 103. Fred Van Vliet, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, got ejected in 5 minutes of play.
Yeah. Dylan the
Which
villain.
yeah, Dylan the villain already entering, regular season form. Jabari Smith Jr., right, looked really good. I think,
Yeah.
in that game, 14.7 rebounds, a block. Really showed, his all around game, which is why he was drafted, why he was, regarded as, being really good. Because initially, before Paolo went number one, a lot of people thought he was going to go number one.
Yeah.
And
That
so
was a
last
consensus.
year as a rookie, he started off kind of slow, but really turned it around the second half of that season. And now in his second season, we saw him in Vegas. He looked great. Um, and if he can kind of continue to flash that all around game, that's going to do some wonders for Houston, right? Because with Shengun, he's a solid offensive player, right, but not a great defender.
Yeah, he's horrible on defense.
But surrounded by guys like Van Vliet, who's a good defender at the guard spot. Um, Dylan Brooks, again, despite the criticisms, he is a really good defender.
Yes, we have to give him that.
Jabari Smith Jr., his defense, his length, I think, is really impressive. So, Jalen Green, 11 points, 0 of 4, but 5 of 12 is fine. 2 assists, a steal. The thing, looking at Houston is, with Udoka, it does feel like they have more, things established in terms of like a lot more ball movement. Because we mentioned the complaints last year from Houston was just not a lot of creativity, just a lot of one-on-one, play. But,
Hmm.
now even some of the guys who, contributed to that one-on-one play last year, they bought into this system. Which I think will make them, overall a better team. I think it'll make them a more exciting team. Um, which is good to see. And again, they have a ton of young guys they can put out there, right? Tari Eason, he went out there, in 21 minutes and he played really well. Thompson, as a shooter, right?
Hmm.
Obviously we know that's going to be an issue. He was 1 for 9, but he did have 9 rebounds, three
Yeah.
assists, and a steal. So again, kind of flashing, some versatility, like we mentioned with Asor, right? His
Hmm.
brother. Cam Whitmore, right? Also played really well. Again, kind of showing, why he was initially considered, to be like a top five pick,
Yeah.
right? 15 points, 4 rebounds, 3 of 4 from three, 6 of 10 from the field. Again, he can score. Obviously the main question is, can he do other stuff? And if he can do that, again, like people thought he could initially, right? Again, I think there's going to be a lot of teams that regret, passing up on him.
Do you think he's a
Again,
sleeper rookie of the year candidate? Or is that an overreaction?
I feel like the issue is he's playing with so many other guys
Right.
that it's going to be really hard for him to put up the numbers. So I don't think he'll be able to win it, but I think he can be on the all rookie teams for
Oh, for
sure.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, like could he be one of the 5, 10 best rookies this year? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
he could. It's because again, the better he plays, the more he'll play.
Right.
He may not necessarily put up like crazy numbers like 18 a game or something like that. But if he's playing like at least 20 minutes every night, and making a positive impact, he's gonna be on that list.
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
so.
Especially
Because
with
again,
Udoka, I think he would give him that opportunity.
right. And that's the other factor is, again, you have a guy who was already established as a really good coach. It's not a guy that was like a gamble in
Right.
terms of, well, we don't know if this guy can coach or not. We already saw him in Boston,
Right.
take a team, that had been, kind of, a good playoff team, but, he took that team to the finals, right? And, especially after, they started off that season really rough. And then, in the span of, a few months, he turned them around and turned them into a team, that had a chance to win a title, and
Right.
now he's taking those talents, down to Houston. Um, and I think it's made a positive impact on these guys so far. Because
For
again, the
sure.
way that they're playing in terms of moving the ball around and the unselfishness, this is not what we saw last year.
Yeah.
It really was a mess. And again, was there's in fairness, there are some personnel changes as well. and I think that's contributed to it a little bit as well. But
I
I
agree.
think again, I think what he's doing, it shows, and hopefully, they'll be a competitive team because again, there's a lot of really good teams in the West, so I don't think they'll make the playoffs, but I do think
Mm,
that they will be
I mean,
better than last year for
yeah,
sure.
I agree. They do have a lot of talent on this team.
Yeah. And then, moving on into some more games, the Jazz and the Clippers, right? So obviously, the Clippers are a team, that's kind of been in the news a lot lately, obviously, because of, the James Harden rumors. And then of course, again, with Kawhi and Paul George, that's a duo that, in theory should be good enough when they're healthy, to be able to compete for a title. The issue is they haven't been healthy. So,
Hmm.
again, they played 20 minutes. They again that starting five, they had Covington in there, in
Hmm.
place of Marcus Morris, right? And Covington showed, he can still contribute, had 4 blocks, 2 steals. Um, I do wonder if he is the fifth starter going forward,
I think
because
so.
he was kind of buried, onto the bench a lot last year. And I do wonder, like, what are they going to do with that? They experimented with Terrence Mann kind of playing like, the 3-4 role at
Hmm.
times. So I do think they have a lot of options. I still feel like they're going to have to pursue, one of those trades, to kind of like shore up, and consolidate that roster. Again, obviously Harden's been mentioned. Brogdon, was this close to being a Clipper initially before, they nixed that deal.
Right.
I wouldn't have a problem with that. The issue is his health. But ultimately, what do you think of the Clippers? Because again, we talked about them this offseason in terms of, we do like a number of the players on the team. It's just the issue is again, is it good enough, to potentially win 4 rounds? And I'm just not sure about that. I feel like they're just right outside of that tier of teams in the West that we think can get to the finals. But I do think if they can get, Harden or somebody, into that mix, they'll have a better chance. Because like I said, I just think they have too many guys that like, you know, probably shouldn't really be playing, but they are because they just have a number of guys to throw out there. Like I said, I think like just consolidate that and get somebody else. But
Sure.
I do like in fairness that group. Because again, you have Westbrook, who can handle the ball and run the point. Then you have Kawhi and Paul George as your main offensive guys. Then you got Covington, who's there, as a 3 and D guy, and now he's kind of transitioned into more of like a four, like a big defender.
Hmm.
And then Zubac, obviously, for rebounds, and blocks and dump offs and everything. So I mean, what
Yeah.
are your thoughts? I guess.
So here's what I would say. I think I do like the starting five. Um, but I'm kind of curious about the bench. Like I feel like, like you said, they do need to consolidate because there are some guys on this roster that's like, okay, are these guys really going to be playing? And something kind of just popped into my mind. I don't think anybody said this, and this probably won't even work, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, like cap wise. But it'd be kind of interesting, if the Clippers really pursue somebody like Siakam. I think they're missing a third star. I think Harden is kind of just out of reach for them. I think Philly's asking price is too steep. I don't know what Toronto's asking price for, Siakam would be, but they need another star. They either need, another star, or they need, a few more impact players. Because on the bench, I'm not seeing enough impact players. Like anytime Bones is going to be out there, I don't think he's going to be making a huge impact. He's going to give you the highlight play, but is that going to be the winning play? Things like that. Batum, I think, is an impact player. Plumlee is for sure an impact player. But like outside of that, it's like okay, and Terrence Mann, of course. But outside of that, I feel like they're just two players short, two impact players short of actually being a team that I could take seriously contention wise.
Yeah, that's the thing, because again, I do like some of the guys. I like Norman Powell.
Yeah.
I like, some of the other guys like KJ Martin. Plumlee's fine. Terrence Mann is fine. Like I said, it just feels like somebody on this roster, is a little bit like just unnecessary.
Right.
Like I said, if those pieces can be moved, to bring in, like I said, somebody else, like you mentioned, some type of third guy, I think that could really do some wonders for this squad. Because I
Hmm.
just feel like, because again, the starting five group is fine, but I just feel like, again, they need somebody else, I
Right.
think to be able to throw out there. But
Yeah.
and then on to the Jazz. Obviously they played as well. Um, again, it was a close game, and again, like they had a bunch of other guys, that didn't necessarily play, but we did see, again, some of the guys like Sexton, Taylor Horton Tucker. Clarkson was moved back to the 6 man role. I don't know if that's permanent, because he did start a lot for them last year.
Yeah.
Um, they had Kessler out there, they had Markkinen, and John Collins, right? Who's 1 for 6, 3 points, 5 rebounds. Obviously, again, it's preseason. But, it is going to be intriguing to see, what Utah does, with those three bigs in that lineup, because I know Markkinen, you know, is playing small forward, but, also like he, for a good chunk of his career, he was a four, now that he, he's got some handle, now he's playing more three,
Right.
but he still is big. He's 7 feet, Kessler's 7 feet, and then Collins is like 6'10" or 6'9" or whatever. So, I do wonder how he fits into that, group. Cause again, of those three guys, obviously Markkinen's probably the best shooter, but Collins, before last year had shot like, around 40% from three.
Hmm.
So I think that's kind of one of the keys to making that work. If he can get that 3-point shot back, and again, still contribute other ways defensively, then I think it will be better. But at the same time, again, like they didn't give up a whole lot to get him. So if it doesn't work out, it's kind of whatever. But like still, like, how did you feel, about, Utah's group of guys? Because some of the other guys didn't play, like, Cavante George, or whatever, their rookie,
Yeah,
right?
Keontae
He's
George. Yeah.
yeah, Keontae George. Obviously he's the guy that's impressed a lot of people. 10
Hmm.
points, 5 assists, 2 steals.
Hmm.
Hendricks didn't really play a lot. He played like 5 minutes.
Hmm.
Um, but still, like with Utah, it's a weird team. I'm not gonna lie, it's a strange team.
Yeah.
But they were a strange team last year, and they were really competitive. But still, like I do think they're probably gonna be worse, just because again the West got better.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts, overall on what you saw from the Jazz?
I mean, like you said, it's kind of a weird team. It's hard to gauge. I don't. Some of these guys I'm not really sure about. Like Horton Tucker, I'm not really too high on, but he did have a great game, so I can't hate. I would prefer to see Jordan Clarkson start in the regular season because I think he's probably more consistent than Horton Tucker. But that would probably be my only gripe. I'd like to also see maybe Taylor Hendricks gets some more minutes because I think that you drafted him for a reason, but he is a rookie, so I do understand. He's not on like the worst team in the league, so he's not going to play, the most minutes. He's not going to be, uh, your leader in minutes played and stuff like that. So, but like you said, I really am hoping that John Collins can really bounce back. I think that's something that he desperately needs. I think Markkinen is good where he's at. I think he played well. Kessler as well, but yeah, mainly I'm looking at John Collins, Taylor Hendricks, and Horton Tucker. Those three guys are probably the ones to watch for me because I don't think Keontae George is going to have like the craziest impact. I think he'll have like really good games this season, but I don't think he's going to play a obscene amount of minutes.
Yeah. Um, yeah, because that's the thing, again, is that the Jazz, they're in a spot now where, again, it's a rebuild. They moved on from, all those guys before. So now it's about, finding these young guys that you can, piece around because you have a star in Markkinen. So you
Right.
have that part kind of, already figured out for the most part. And then, can you get these other guys around him, kind of straight, in terms of, again, who are the other guys around him?
Right.
That's the main thing. They have a number of guys. They just got to figure out which ones. And again,
Exactly.
it's a young team, so they'll figure it out, down the line.
Yeah.
Um, after that, a number of other matchups, but it was, like say Suns Nuggets, but none of the Suns guys played. The Nuggets guys played a little bit. Then you had like a few games, where you had teams play against teams from overseas, like say Dallas played against Real Madrid and actually lost.
Yeah.
Although in fairness, Luca did, only play a few minutes, but still, and I think Kyrie was out as well. Um, so not much to say there, right? Like Portland played, but again, they also played, another overseas group. They haven't played, like a game against another NBA team yet. Um, so pretty much, in terms of preseason, those are the main, things to take away. Like say for Philly, none of their guys have played yet. The Lakers and the Nets, they did play, and most of the Lakers guys played. They looked fine. We've already talked about them because we talked about them in the previous preseason discussion about them, even though LeBron didn't play, but still.
Right.
Um, so pretty much that kind of does it for the preseason stuff. So now, we're just gonna, I guess, kind of get into some more things going on in terms of news and rumors. So, obviously, the Kai Jones saga, is kind of pretty much, I guess, for now done.
Yeah.
According to Shams, they waived him. So now he's a free agent. Don't necessarily know if he's going to get claimed. Obviously, everybody's is aware of what's happened. He had been away from the team for a while because I think there was some concerns going on just about like a lot of the posts and things. But now you know they cut him, so now he's gone. Just kind of a strange saga. Initially he had requested a trade, and maybe that was the final straw. So, I'm not sure if a team would have traded for him, but I don't know because again, in fairness, we don't know a whole lot of what happened, but they have waived him, so now he is gonna be a free agent.
Yeah, it's kind of an unfortunate situation. We don't really want to harp on or speculate, on what really was going on with him in his life. Uh, but geez, it really is sad because I think he had, a decent amount of potential. Not, a star, all-star level, but at least,
First
a
round
rotational guy. But yeah, like you said, a first-round pick. I think he was 19th to the Hornets or something like that. Um, but yeah, I really hope, he does find a new team, and maybe that's just what he needs is a change of scenery because I don't like I don't know the Charlotte Hornets. Interesting organization, not the best one to be in, I don't think. But at the same time, you just got to take care of yourself and your mental health.
So, um, moving on, a big thing from the Athletic. So, it seems like there was a study, where it's kind of been suggested that the load management thing isn't necessarily, accurate, because, for a while, there'd been a lot of discussions about the idea of, oh, well, the reason why we're doing load management is because, it kind of helps, protect our players, from injuries. But,
Hmm.
you know, again, like I said, according to the Athletic, it seems like, an NBA official said resting players to prevent injury, preserve them for the playoffs is no longer supported, by that data. So it seems like, just sitting guys out, doesn't necessarily mean that it makes them less likely to get hurt, which again, like we've seen it because we've seen like guys, sit out for stretches and then still get hurt.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't necessarily think, that that was ever really helpful. I mean, like, I think the main thing is, there's so many games and, these guys are playing, like every other night, or especially as you get, closer down the stretch of the season. And again, obviously they're also coming in with a lot of, treaded tires, right? Where it's like, they were playing AAU, like every other, day, sometimes multiple times in a day,
Right.
right? So like I don't think that was the problem. But again, also at the same time, like I guess in a way it kind of justifies like, hey, now we're not gonna have to sit guys as much because now there's a study out that suggests and shows like, hey, this didn't really help at all. Because
Yeah.
again, we've definitely had a number of guys miss time with or without load management, right? Like, even say like a guy like a Kawhi Leonard. I know he had, some bad injuries in terms of the ACL and meniscus, but they did sit him a lot. And again,
Hmm.
other guys, like not just him, but like there
Yeah.
are plenty of guys that sit and still get hurt. So
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I think we don't really talk about it enough in terms of the amount of wear and tear that basketball really does due to your body. That's a lot of pressure on your body. And it was kind of interesting. I was watching a YouTube video, I think it was last week. It was a Jesser video, actually, and Giannis was in it. And he made a comment that I never really thought about because it was guess the NBA players. So they had five people with masks on, and they were trying to guess who played in the NBA out of all of them. Spoiler alert, it was Quinn Cook. But the it was interesting because he said, "Let me see your hands." So he looked at one of the guy's hands because the guy was at least like 6'10", and then he's like, "Oh yeah, he was not in the league because his hand doesn't have the wear and tear." And I was like, "Huh, that's kind of an interesting way to tell if somebody actually played sports for a decent amount." Because I mean, we all talk about it like we've seen the horrible NBA feet pictures, like their feet are
yeah,
kind of disgusting. But so it's like, okay, that would make sense. The rest of their body would be worn down and torn down because of how much pressure they're putting on their bodies, every night during the regular season. And even in the off season when they're grinding to stay in shape for the regular season, it's crazy to really think about.
yeah, exactly. And again, like it is kind of intriguing because now, again, we know the rules have changed this season where they're not gonna, let guys necessarily like sit out for long stretches. And now also keep in mind we got the setup where you gotta play at least 65 games, in order to qualify, for those end of season awards. So that,
Right.
I think this is something that is intriguing because again, there had been a debate about whether or not this was actually effective. But it seems like it necessarily wasn't.
And it
And
kind of
they
makes
even
sense though, because
yeah,
it
and
would
if
be
anything,
like it's like why would you if you're resting and you're not doing that activity, that same pressure activity, of course when you come back you're probably still going to get hurt.
yeah, and that was the other thing they even mentioned. Like they're also kind of rusty. Like let's say the second night of a back to back, they don't play the first night and then they come back. Well, it didn't really help them because
Right.
then they end up just playing even worse.
Exactly. So I understand, why they're coming out and trying to debunk this whole thing.
Yeah. Um. So now, to kind of close it off, I guess the big thing came out, the other day is the survey. So every year, they ask, all the GMs, about 50 questions. They don't answer like necessarily every single question, but
Hmm.
they ask them, questions about like say like, who's going to win the championship, who's the best player, which team, had the best offseason or whatever. So we're not going to go over all of them, but I just thought I would kind of throw out, some of them because again,
Sure.
these are the guys, that make the decisions in terms of the rosters to put together. So it's always kind of intriguing to
Right.
see what they think, because again, it gives us kind of a look into like, what they see, or what do they see in terms of like, oh, this is what I want to see out of a roster, or like this is what I think a championship team is like.
Hmm.
So one of the first questions was which team will win the 2024 NBA Finals. So it was actually a tie. So 33% said the Celtics, and then another 33% said the Nuggets. Now again, we don't know how many answered each question.
Hmm.
So that's the 33% of whoever answered. So it could
Right.
have been like 20 GMs that answered, or it could have been all 30.
Right.
Um, but it is kind of intriguing, right? Because again, like Boston and Denver are kind of considered amongst the favorites, and then the Bucks were third at 23%, and then Phoenix was fourth at 7%, and then the Clippers still hanging around. They were fifth at
What?
2%. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. Maybe they see something that we don't, but I don't
yeah.
know. That's
And then
interesting.
also the other thing that's kind of cool is they show what the number one response was last year. So last year, 43% of GMs said the Bucks. Which was funny because again, we all, we thought the Bucks were definitely the favorites last
Yeah.
year, and that ended up not happening at all.
Hmm.
And I don't think Denver. I don't remember where Denver was, but they definitely were not like any of the top spots on the list.
Right.
Um, and then who will win MVP? So that's another one, right? So 43% said Jokic.
Hmm.
So and
About
then
dang
after that,
time.
yeah, and then after that, the second place was Giannis, then it was Tatum, and then it was Luca. And then last year it was the person that they thought was Luca. So
I
and
think
then
that's fair.
yeah, and then another one. If you were starting a franchise today and could sign any player in the NBA, who would it be? 33% said Nikola Jokic. So it seems like there's kind of a theme now where it seems like there, some type of consensus amongst the GMs where they must feel like, okay, now this guy might be the best player. And like, it is kind of funny because sometimes there's also recency bias because, like, if a guy wins a title, then like, not even just Jokic, right? But then like they'll shoot up on the list.
Right.
And then after that, it was
Same thing
actually
happened
when
with
Wembanyama
Giannis.
number two. Yep.
I was just
And then
saying
after
that. Okay. What? Wait,
yeah,
what?
and then after Jokic, number two was Wembanyama at 23%.
Holy.
And then
Okay.
Giannis was third, and then Luca was fourth, and Edwards was actually fifth, which was kind of intriguing.
That's
And
a
last year
solid
was Giannis
list.
at 55%. So overwhelmingly it was considered Giannis last year, but that's dropped off, which I find kind of interesting because again, it's not like Giannis all of a sudden, just got way
It's that
worse at basketball.
recency stuff, bro. Like it's bad.
Which
When they win a
yeah,
title, everybody starts glazing.
right. Which player forces opposing coaches to make the most adjustments? It's Curry at 40%. Last year was still Curry, but it was at 52.
Okay.
So now, like Jokic, he shot up there. He's at number
Of
two.
course.
Giannis is third, Luca's fourth, and Embiid was fifth.
Okay.
Breakout season. Anthony Edwards was at 23%, right? So it seems like they kind of feel like, yeah, he's the next guy to have a big year.
Right.
Then it was Cade Cunningham at
Hmm.
20%, so just a few behind him. Then
Okay.
Franz Wagner, right, which is a guy we think is going to have a
Yeah.
really good season. Paulo Banchero and Tyrese Maxey then were tied for fourth.
Okay. I can't be too
Then
mad
they
at
had,
that.
yeah, then they had like, best player at each position. They had Steph at the point guard, Booker at the two guard, Tatum at small forward, Giannis at power forward, and then Jokic as the center.
Hmm. Okay. Well, that's kind of weird. I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah, and then which team made the best overall moves? The Celtics and the Bucks were tied. And then Lillard, they felt like was the biggest impact in terms of acquisition, while Smart was the most underrated.
Okay.
Most improved team, Oklahoma City. And then like the different awards, right? Like Wembanyama, Rookie of the Year, and then like best player in 5 years in terms of rookies, Victor Wembanyama.
Okay.
Who's the best international player in the NBA? Jokic, right? Best defensive one I think was intriguing because they had Giannis at 40%, and then Holiday, and then Draymond, Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson, and Kawhi. And then in the also receiving votes, so probably like maybe one or two GMs, right? That Caruso, Anthony Davis,
Hmm.
Luke Dort, and then Gobert.
Hmm. I mean, those guys are all really good at defense in their own, special way, I guess. But That is interesting to see some guys who aren't necessarily like, stars or even really starters sometimes be on that list. I like that.
And then who's the best perimeter defender? Drew.
Oh yeah.
Interior defender, Jaren Jackson. Versatile is Giannis, which I find kind of intriguing.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a little surprised that it's not like I kind of would have assumed maybe like a Draymond or something, but
Right.
they did go with Giannis. So
Okay. I can't be too mad at that though. Makes
yeah,
sense.
some other changes. So last year, in terms of best head coach, it was Spoelstra, but it was like kind of close. Now it's considered overwhelmingly Spoelstra, right? So
Okay.
Spoelstra was at 52% of GMs last year said that, and then now it's 73%.
Okay. I mean,
And
that's
Tyronn
pretty
Lue was
good.
second. Yeah, then Tyronn Lue, then Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich, and then Mike Malone was actually Michael Malone, excuse me, was fifth.
Okay. Uh, hey, you can't be too mad at that. Spolstra
Yeah,
has deserved that. I think he deserves that.
yeah. Even for like manager slash motivator of people, like it was Steve Kerr last year, and
Hmm.
now it's Spoelstra.
Yeah, I think that's rightfully deserved, especially considering the type of season they had last year and
Yeah.
postseason. Holy cow.
Yeah, Mike Brown, best offense, in terms of like the coach that has the best offense, which is interesting because that wouldn't have been the case, when he was a coach before, because that was kind of a weakness of his because he was more of a defensive minded
Hmm.
coach. So yeah, so like, again, like, and then there's like other like, ancillary ones, like, uh fastest player, best shooter, most athletic. I'm not gonna go into all that, but um, and then which player would you want taking a shot with the game on the line? So who do you think that is?
Ooh, Iguodala. I'm kidding. It's not Iguodala.
It's not him. It's all
Shot on the
it's
line
all
is
players.
probably Fox.
It's actually not.
Oh, who is it?
So it's actually Steph
Okay,
is at number one
really?
at 37%.
I wouldn't even take
Last year
Steph. He's not even that clutch.
he was actually the number one option last year, and he was actually at 55% last year. So it's dropped, but I think that's because some other guys have kind of like stepped in.
Yeah.
So because he's at 37% right now, and he was at 55 last year. And
Right.
then Durant is second,
Okay.
Lillard is third, and
Okay.
then Butler and Jokic were tied for fourth.
Yeah, I'm going Fox, man. I'd take Fox over KD at this point, and that's kind of saying something.
And then also receiving votes was Luca and Kyrie.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I
Yeah.
wouldn't have thought
So
Curry. Game on the line? I don't know.
yeah. And then best basketball IQ. Who do you think that is?
Jokic.
Yeah, so it was him.
Yeah, it
So
was
he
either
and
going to
he
be Jokic or Luca or Braun.
yeah, it was LeBron last year at 45%, and now it's Jokic at
Yeah.
50%. Um so yeah, like I said, I didn't go over all of them because it's a lot.
Right.
Again, like 50 questions, but still, like, it is always kind of intriguing, to kind of go over the stuff. Like I said, in terms of the takeaways, it does feel like a lot of the GMs have shifted into the idea of like, all right, we think Jokic is the best player.
Right.
And then now it seems like they kind of feel like, yeah, Spoelstra is like, I don't know if I would say by far, but yeah, it almost feels like that he's like, head over shoulders, like better than everybody as a head coach.
Yeah.
Um, and then, that's those are kind of the main takeaways. So I mean, again, like it's always kind of fun, to kind of look at it, and it's gone back all the way to like 2002, 2003. So it's on the NBA's website. So anybody who's watching this, can go on the website and they can look back,
Yeah.
previous years, because it's really funny. Because I'm pretty sure there was one year, because we talked about it, where I think it was Towns, where he was chosen as the guy to be the player that you would want to start, a franchise with,
Right.
because again, when he first came into the league, everybody viewed, him very highly,
Yeah.
because again, he was really good when he first came in, but now
Absolutely.
and now it's kind of interesting because it feels like, like the tables have really turned for him in terms of people have kind of soured on him, I think, a lot more.
Yeah. And it doesn't help that like his PR isn't the greatest either. But hey, it is what it is. He is what he is. He's a good shooting big man. Simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Take. So again, let us know your thoughts, in terms of what you thought of our looks, our views on the preseason, or any of the other things that we talked about, right? Like maybe, maybe you take issues, with what the GM said in terms of like, what they thought, because obviously, you disagree, with some of the things that they said,
Absolutely.
in there. Yeah, exactly. So, kind of let us know, and again, check out our TikTok, which we just set up, in addition to our other socials like X and Instagram. And also obviously don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. So again, we appreciate, all the support. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you Monday.